Welcome, listeners, viewers, and online guests to the next in our series of Safe to Trade presentations. I'm your host, Kelvin Wood, and I'm also the certification body manager at Shield Safety. And this month, we continue our series of discussions, which will provide you lots of information and all you need to know about Safe to Trade. We do hope that you enjoy today's session, and we thank you to those who are joining us live online in our virtual forum. After our conversation today, you will have the opportunity to ask some questions of our guests. So if that's you and you've got some questions, please feel free to write them in the comments box. And when we get to the Q&A at the end of the session, I'll ask as many as we can, time permitting. So speaking of guests, today we have some very special people to introduce you to. We have Clare Lycett, Senior Practitioner in Environmental Health at Milton Keynes Council. And we have Rob Easton, Head of Environmental Health at Shield Safety. So good morning to you both. Thank you for joining us today.
Morning.
We know that you've both kindly been on this series of webinars before. But for those people watching who have missed your previous episodes, I'd hope if you could just introduce yourself again to our audience. So starting with yourself, Clare.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Clare Lycett. I am an EHP chartered and have worked in environmental health for almost 30 years now. I don't know where that time has gone. We have a primary authority partnership with Shield, and I think that's been for almost 15 years now, 14 years. And I say we've been working obviously with Safe to Trade as part of our projects with the primary authority.
Thanks, Clare. And over to yourself, Rob.
Good morning, Kelvin. Good morning, Clare. I love the idea of being classed as a special people, Kelvin. You're very, very kind. To introduce Rob Easton, Head of Environmental Health at Shield Safety. So like Kelvin and like Clare, I am an environmental health practitioner, chartered fellow with CEnvH. I've been with Shield Safety for a number of years and have been supporting businesses for over 25 years, improve their safety, performance and culture, both in the UK and abroad. As Clare said, I don't know where that time has gone, but there's been some fantastic adventures along the way.
What a lovely way to phrase things, Rob. I agree with you. Thank you so much. And as always, everyone, I'm Kelvin Wood. I'm the certification body manager at Shield Safety. I'm an EHP by trade also, with a long history of working here at Shield Safety Group, but previous to that, working within hospitality and catering as a operations manager. So this month, our topic of the month is health and safety. We are here to celebrate and mark the introduction and launch of health and safety clauses into the Safe to Trade standard. So let's start off by, well, dare I say, acknowledging the elephant in the room. Why are we talking about health and safety in our Love Safe Food series? So why has Safe to Trade gone down the health and safety route? Rob, I'm wondering if you can help us with that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. I think we have to acknowledge it was always the intention. It was always the intention to bring health and safety into Safe to Trade. And indeed, if you look at the history of this scheme, if you look back to where it formed in COVID-19, dare I mention that? And Clare, you were heavily involved in those early days of creating the Safe to Trade scheme for COVID-19. And that's where we learned a lot about what does it mean to operate a VTPA, the governance processes, all of those things. So it was always our intention. We started with food safety. There's a huge demand for food safety, and it's a natural movement into health and safety. And of course, it's right. Often when we're out auditing sites, we'll be auditing locations for food safety, health and safety. So it makes absolute sense to bring it into the standard. It's about everyday safer. It's about making a difference. So it may seem odd seeing the series is called Love Safe Food, but actually, if you look at the history, if you look at the way that the scheme is administered and it's governed, it makes absolute perfect sense.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rob. I guess really the kind of the love safe food is, you know, making the world a safer place to eat out in, and the food might be perfectly safe, but if you fall over in the restaurant and hurt yourself, you're not really going to have the best experience as a guest. So yeah, it is the natural extension and the all-encompassing safety. Rob, you just mentioned there about the way our customers traditionally have their audits, and not to get too lost in the weeds here. When we have been delivering the Safe to Trade standard as a food-only certification process, it meant that our customers have to purchase a separate audit to capture health and safety. So it just makes it quite untidy to have two separate reports, different sets of actions. It makes league tables different and operational challenges for the certification body to deliver alongside. So yeah, the kind of the operational reasons has come as much from the customer as it has from us. So Claire, from a regulator perspective, how do you see this development being beneficial, dare I say? So, you know, health and safety proactive inspections haven't really been being delivered to catering and hospitality for many years now. So, you know, what's the hook of getting local authorities on board with this?
I think the thing is, it's all about safety, isn't it? And officers don't have a program of inspections for the catering and hospitality sectors in the same way as they do with food, because it's not governed in the same way. So we obviously have the FSA who give inspection targets on the rating of businesses, whereas with the HSE it relies on a set of criteria that's set out in a local authority circular 67. The HSE sort of dictates the areas that local authorities are to look at, and this is limited to project work mainly, unless there's intelligence to do otherwise. With you know, and that's the good thing really where Safe to Trade kicks in, because the audit set, as Rob's just said, the inclusion of it is really important, because it gives a better overview of what the business is doing, where they're at, and I say it's all part of this management process, isn't it? Using the audit set with a business, it just helps really in terms of them knowing where they are at, you knowing where they're at, improving the whole management and control of risk. So as part of the Safe to Trade scheme, we have been able to issue assured advice, and from our point of view that's great, because we can see that the escalations when there are non-conformities are covered in exactly the same way. So if there is a risk to harm at any point, it would be escalated through the process and through the scheme so that it can be acted upon.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know we're saying, or we're not saying, that local authorities' resources are a factor in this change, because as you've just said, you're not instructed to undertake, but it's that kind of complete circle, I guess, of if the safety management systems are implemented and there's an increase in public health in that there are fewer accidents,
yes, I think
there are then fewer accident investigations, hopefully.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think local authorities will go and...
Sorry, Claire, go on. I think we have a bit of a delay there. I beg your pardon. You carry on.
Oh, that will usually get into businesses to look at accidents. That is the point, to investigate an accident. But actually, you know, the point of adding all of these, the health and safety points into this audit set, is to make sure that we stop, you know, anything going wrong in the first place. So obviously that benefits everybody in terms of resources and controlling the risk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So one of the processes in acquiring assured advice on the content was this legislative mapping, we call it, of the health and safety clauses to identify the requirements and the best practice. Was there any challenges to this process? Was it harder than it was, dare I say, doing the food aspects?
Well, yes, because health and safety is very different. So when we think about food safety, very often we look at it as a flow, don't we? We look at it as a flow diagram, and it all neatly fits down in processes and all the rest of it. Whereas with health and safety, it's more of a spider's web, and there are chunks of puzzle that we also slit together, really. And so what we did was we looked at health and safety management systems generally, all of the areas that you generally find in hospitality, catering establishment, and then sort of drill down on what was required. So obviously Shield had then provided mapping themselves in terms of what was all of the clauses that we were going to cover, and we made sure that there were standard clauses for the pieces of legislation, and then obviously move that through to the audit set. So it's spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets is how I like to think about it, just to make sure that we've got everything there in order and in control. Obviously, we've looked at the legislation, we've looked at guidance, we've looked at health and safety management systems across the board, just to make sure that we've got everything included that we think that fits the scope as such. The health and safety legislation, obviously, is it 50 years, isn't it, from the Health and Safety at Work Act, which we should be celebrating, shouldn't we? So happy birthday, Health and Safety at Work Act, which has stood us in a good place. And the European changes haven't really made any difference. We've still got the same guidance and legislation. There's nothing that has sort of hampered progress, if you see what I mean, in that way.
Yeah, understood. So, I mean, you've already touched on the introduction there, Claire, but let's get into some of the detail, if we may, of the new clauses that have been introduced to the standard, and obviously the audit set on the back of it. So, I mean, it might be a little bit
standard.
Oh, I love it. You've got it printed. I don't dare print them, Claire, because as soon as I do, we need to update.
I have. I like to scroll all over it. That's the trouble.
Wonderful. So we might end up in a little bit of a conversational ping pong here, in that, Rob, if you wouldn't mind taking us through some of the key hazard areas within hospitality and catering that we have sought to address in the new standard. And then, Claire, tell us a little bit about where they are in the standard, if they're included, the kind of the requirements, best practice, if you may. So, Rob, over to you as Claire's going through the pages.
Claire's going. I don't know how to do it out of kindness, Claire, if I do it alphabetically, significant risk, or we'll just throw stuff. Let's see how it goes. But we'll start alphabetically.
Have a think about it.
We'll start with alphabetically, shall we? Let's start with asbestos. Obviously, we know about asbestos. There's the duty to identify if there's asbestos containing materials, a management plan. And
absolutely.
then training team in the significant risk. So what would you have in there around asbestos?
Yeah, absolutely. So asbestos does take some of these as well. So obviously we know that it's necessary to have an asbestos survey and a management plan in place, and that these must have been conducted by a competent person. And then as best practice also, we've got the additional recommended controls such as labelling or enclosing asbestos containing materials.
Wonderful. Thank
so
you.
That there's a requirement, and then the best practice within the standard.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and that's the way the standard set up. Exactly the same as it is for food, so that we've got what the requirement is and then best practice.
Super. And I suppose a natural one to move on from asbestos is very similar with Legionella, because it's it's often controlled by building managers. I'm guessing similar approach for Legionella as asbestos.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, Rob. It's about maintaining, inspecting and testing the water systems, isn't it? Making sure that you've got a schematic, having a risk assessment and monitoring records of actions and the results that are taken. And then, of course, we've got the best practice side of this as well, which is about recording your temperatures of your water, your hot and cold water temperatures, with corrective actions for out of range results. And I think that that's really important in terms, I think people don't necessarily understand Legionella as well as perhaps we ought.
And it's interesting, and I'm really aware. I said I was going to go alphabetical, and I went from asbestos to Legionella, so there was no following of. So I'll try and keep with the alphabetical theme.
That's fine.
As I'm listening to you, Claire, as I'm here, it's obvious the standard. It's what an amazing support for businesses as well by prescribing what the requirement is, and then best practice. I can see this will be a real aid to businesses to understand what is a requirement on them, what's best practice. It sounds like a fantastic bit of work.
I think the best thing about it actually is that it's very easy to read in those terms as well. So the requirements, you're not trawling through all legislation. It's somewhere that you can go to, and then you would perhaps go to the legislation to have a little look if you wanted to explore it a bit further. But the requirement is actually documented for everybody, and obviously the standard, the audit set is set up so that the requirements and the best practice is separate, but it could be used almost as a training tool, if I'm honest. And that's really useful, isn't it, business, Tim?
Yeah. And just to point out as well, if I may, before we move on,
everybody's overwhelmed, aren't they, with documentation?
As a supporting document to the standard, these are technical subjects. These are not written for the layman or for your standard food business operator. We have produced the interpretation guide that we hand to all food business operators when they register onto Safe to Trade, which provides further explanatory information of specifically what to do in order to meet the requirements, because there's only so much text we can really put in the body of the standard. Otherwise it just become a handbook of environmental health, dare we say. So
please.
I didn't want to
standard needs to be defined.
So
I've got a couple more for you. Oh, sorry, Kelvin. I was just going to do a couple more to Claire. Cosh is one that's always interesting. I know businesses struggle with Cosh often. So what would we have in the standard for Cosh?
So yes, it does feature, and it is about undertaking a Cosh assessment on the hazardous chemicals. And obviously, it doesn't dictate how somebody should do that. It just says that they have it, because we all see different methods and some quite exciting, interesting methods. I've got a partner who actually has photographs of each of the chemicals and things as well. So lots of things that people can do to help themselves, if you know what I mean. And there is a best practice section as well, which is assessing all chemicals, having the information there, the instructions and training available, and having these the hazardous chemicals in the chemical store. So there are lots. Yes, there is advice in here, and I say, as Kelvin said, it goes further in the interpretation guide.
I managed to get up to C on my alphabetical ordering. I don't know. We could go on and do electrical safety, gas, hazardous substances. I'm sure would be in there. But I think I absolutely. It sounds like a great description of how we have the requirement and the best practice there in the standard. Sounds fantastic.
Wonderful. So we have been going down the kind of, dare I say, statutory inspection, certification route, all of this control of third-party risk assessment from competent people that come in and out of healthy businesses all the time, and what kind of management actions a food business operator needs to take themselves in to support that. So all really variations on a theme. What about anything that's kind of, dare I say, more work practice based in terms of hazard areas, the non-paperwork report style areas? Are there any specific examples in the standard there, Rob?
That'd be an first aid is one that I go to straight away as a thought. So obviously looking at the requirements to understand that provision, that first aid assessment, the first aid needs assessment, provision of materials, etc. Claire, what would the standard say in detail on that and best practice around the first aid?
So all about the provision of the kits and what's actually held in the kits, and there's very specific guidance, etc., on that, and also about competent persons in terms of what you are going to provide at premises in terms of first aid, from a business point of view, whether you're going to have deemed first aiders yourselves or do referral, depending on the number of days that somebody has been trained.
It comes to mind. I've just thought of two others that I could keep on going, and for fear of one for me is we talk about safe to trade being a consumer standard. That's really, really important, isn't it? And what we haven't talked much about here is guest safety. So what would the standard include around guest safety? And then the next one, I'll give you a little warning. I want to talk about mental well-being, but we'll start with guest safety.
Yes, well, obviously guests are individuals, aren't they? And some need more things than others. And it's about having that assessment of individual persons and how you would approach that in terms of, say, evacuations, or their needs in terms of what could happen or go wrong in a dry gym. So, having correct signage up about for them in terms of what their capabilities are, where they would go to, how they would raise concerns or raise the alarm for themselves, especially in these smaller gym units. And that's the kind of thing that we have to really think about, don't we, in terms of some of these older buildings. I stayed in a hotel in Amsterdam just before Christmas, and I was permanently thinking about evacuation because we were up and down, and all these things. And I was thinking, how does this work in terms of safe areas and how you would get people out? And they were so narrow, or the whole thing. And and I was thinking, we're all capable, etc. But it is a concern, isn't it? And then obviously you've got to think about maintenance of equipment and what that looks like, and about daily checks, also with things like pre-planned maintenance, etc., and those checks as well. So it's just ensuring that the systems are all in place for individuals so that they have a good and safe experience.
I love that you were in Amsterdam and always an EHO. There we go. We just
I know, it's dreadful, isn't it? And I can't help myself.
You're on holiday and you're thinking, well, what the escape route?
Well, you're looking at things all the time, aren't you? You can't help yourself, can you? That thing.
It's interesting playing. You absolutely, such as life. It was interesting. We talked about guests. The other aspect, I suppose, is visitors, contractors, other people coming to the business. So again, that'll be different to the food safety side of it. So I'm thinking managing visitors, managing contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing there is it's important to know who is on site, isn't it? So there's a signing in, signing out process, that there's been a sharing of documentation information beforehand. Everybody knows who is actually in control of the situation. And that's where we have the permit to work system. So it's just ensuring that everybody has, that there is knowledge and acknowledgement of people coming and going from your site, and that everybody's safe. Particularly, you've got to think about lone working as well.
Very good. Kelvin, I noticed I am going to ask about work-related stress, mental well-being, because obviously that's a growing significance. We know this. But I note that Palminder in the comments has asked a question around car parks and EV. So what I'll do, Palminder, I'm just acknowledging, I know the danger here is, and I see Anna's also brought in a question around pressure systems, pressure vessels, coffee. So Kelvin, how would you like to do this? Would we like to take the individual comments, or should we get back to people? I'm just aware that we could have hundreds of different sections coming in.
Indeed. Firstly, thank you to everyone for putting your questions in the comments box. As we said, this is a huge topic of conversation, and we're not going to sit here on this call and list every single clause, because we would be here all day, quite frankly. So we've got a selection of questions here. We'll ask them at the end, if that's okay, if you don't mind, Palminda, and we'll carry on, because Rob, you said you wanted to ask specifically about mental health and well-being there.
Yeah, it really is. As I know, so far we've talked through those aspects we'd expect with health and safety, the Legionellas, the asbestos. But obviously the significance of mental well-being in the workplace is growing and growing. We see that with hate. We see that in absenteeism. We see that on the impact on businesses. So Claire, we explore how mental well-being is covered in the standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the HSE has produced some really useful tools actually to help businesses. So in the standard, obviously we have about undertaking a risk assessment and relevant risk assessments for different situations, with review periods, and then obviously we're looking at information support, understanding of roles, zero tolerance to bullying, which is astronomical in terms of hospitality and catering situations, and has been on the rise, particularly bad since COVID. So yes, it is included in the work-related stress periods, and obviously that also covers sort of areas of welfare as well, and make sure that people, I'm just sort of having a look at it now in terms of considering people's needs and aids, etc., making sure that there's physical as well as mental health covered.
Wonderful.
That's fantastic. I'm sure people listening will be reassured that really important topic has been covered off in the standard, and I think it demonstrates, Kelvin, doesn't it, how it is a live, forward-thinking, truly representative of the industry standards. So that's really reassuring.
Yeah, and it's really mapped against the industry that the standard relates to. This standard is applicable to catering and hospitality, so it covers all of those main hazard profiles you would be expected to risk assess within that industry anyway. And as Safe to Trade matures and we move into other standards, such as a leisure standard or a retail standard, the specific content of the clauses will be specific for those industry areas. So as I said, we could list them all A to Z. If anyone's got
what Z would be, I don't know, what would Z be? Zoonotic infections. Yeah, zoonotic infections. I don't know.
So if anyone's got any specific questions about inclusion, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll get to the questions a little bit later. But all of this information is available online, and we can certainly follow up through our marketing channels as well. So we're very just keen to start this conversation of the inclusion. So we've talked about the standard an awful lot, and that has been the bulk of the work, certainly with our governance and the change requests and assured advice with yourself, Claire. But in order to measure the adherence to the standard, so that we can approve people on Safe to Trade, that they meet the standard clauses, we obviously have an audit. So, Rob, has the audit stayed the same with the inclusion of health and safety being incorporated? Is there any material difference?
If you're familiar with Safe to Trade, you'll be familiar with that. There's that requirement, and then there's the best practice. And the great thing is we've done all of the hard work when we did the food safety standard, didn't we? So we transferred that across. We've learned from that. We apply it, and it works. You have requirement, you have best practice. To become Safe to Trade, then obviously you have to meet all of the requirements, and obviously that provision of evidence afterwards and verification. But if you're familiar with Safe to Trade, it carries on nice and simply. It carries on through.
Absolutely. And so just to paraphrase there, to meet the Safe to Trade standard, one must demonstrate that all of the requirements have been met. So even though we've just talked at length about lots of best practices, that won't be detrimental to achieving Safe to Trade approval if those actions are identified and not closed off. However, a lot of customers, just from a complete risk mitigation perspective that I see when I'm issuing certification decisions, will just close off everything regardless of whether it's requirements or best practice, just because they want to actually eliminate risk as far as possible within their business. So again, you can't really do a conversation about health and safety without using the terminology suitable and sufficient. Everything tends to be based on risk assessment. So it's really challenging with health and safety because we have a standardized approach for the audit team, but obviously with health and safety, there's so much based on judgment. So it is a bit of a calibration challenge that we've seek to overcome. How can an auditor demonstrate that a clause has been met, Rob, when control measures would differ so wildly depending on the venue that you're in?
It's so important around the quality of the auditor, and we know that if you look at those that are authorised to undertake safe to trade audits, the calibre of the auditor that's meant, it's that EHP, it's a degree, a master's in environmental health, demonstrate continual professional development. That is absolutely key. And we're always proud of the level of the auditor that undertakes the work, but this is when it becomes really, really important. It's not a black and white. It's not I was talking to someone earlier today about caravan licensing. There's something we haven't done for decades, but that's so prescriptive. It's one of those very rare areas of EH world that's an absolute, isn't it? And it just reminded me, actually, this is the skill, this is the that's learned, that's honed by the auditors, is that understanding of risk. It's that understanding of the hierarchy of controls, what measures are suitable and sufficient. The answer to everything is not PPE and training, which is what would have seen on risk assessment. It's the auditor being able to say, well, actually, let's apply the hierarchy of controls. Have they considered that? And then, is that suitable? Is there another stage that could have been done before this to mitigate, to remove the hazard completely, or if it's left? So it comes down to that absolute, the quality of the auditor, the background of the auditor, continual professional development. And then, of course, there is the governance, there is the shadow auditing as well, to make sure that there's the consistency. Quite honestly, this would not be possible with someone who didn't possess those skills. That's why the quality of the auditor is absolutely key to this. But then surrounded by the governance procedures to ensure that there is that consistency.
Wonderful, thanks, Rob. And what about the evidence verification process? Would that differ at all for health and safety, or is it the same as food?
It's worked brilliantly, hasn't it? It's that ability to upload the evidence through the software, and then for it to be assessed by an independent environmental health practitioner. And what I am hearing as well, and I see from the chat, there's people here that are on the Safe to Trade scheme already for food safety. That is really, really valued, that independent verification by a safety professional that the risk has been managed and reduced to an acceptable level. So the process remains the same. And in fact, what it does is it brings that reassurance to businesses that the risks are being controlled. When I'm talking to people, they love that. They absolutely love that knowing that it's been independently verified.
Yeah, I actually, dare I say, sell that as one of the main benefits to food business operators. For a multi-location business, there will always be someone with the thankless task at head office who has to make sure that all of their locations have managed their actions from an audit and they're not just closing things off. That's actually part of the service with Safe to Trade. We not only look at them, but it's time-based, and we check the evidence. The evidence can be photographs, documents. So it's not just a matter of typing in done. So that takes a huge amount of pain away from a time resource away from a safety manager for a multi-location. So evidence verification is one of the huge celebration areas, I say, of Safe to Trade.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so speaking of benefits,
and also, can I say that the drill down from that, Kelvin, I was just going to say, actually, having seen the drill down from what the audit sets, it is amazing in terms of how far you can drill down to see, what failures there are in terms of, what needs to be tackled. And so sometimes, very often in an audit set, it'll just be the whole, the audit point. But actually, this is subsection down to make it even more clear of what needs to be tackled.
Wonderful. Thanks, Claire. So yeah, we talk about benefits. We've talked about the food business operators a lot here, but as Rob mentioned earlier, this is a consumer scheme. So, what are the benefits to the consumer? One of the benefits of Safe to Trade is the ability to log consumer feedback. And we've done sessions in previous months based around consumer feedback or consumer sessions, or how businesses can market their safe to trade approval. And we are aware that in this day and age of TripAdvisor, you can get malicious ratings added. So we're very aware of that aspect of consumer feedback. But when it comes to safe to trade, that is a trigger, certainly for me as the certification body manager, that if we get persistent and ongoing negative feedback for a particular location, it would trigger an investigation for me and a potential downgrade from the register. So with health and safety, there's been a natural evolution of we ask for health and safety feedback. So, you know, what are we doing in that aspect, Rob? Because the general public are not safety inspectors. So how would they know what's safe, what's unsafe? What would we ask them to be looking out for?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Kelvin. So there's two areas that we've asked for feedback on through the scheme. So the first one, and I'll explain why in a sec, is the first one looks around fire exits. You know, it's the blocking of the fire exits. Are they obstructed? And the second one is around the physical condition of the premises. So it's the upkeep of the furniture, it's the upkeep of the premises. And I know it feels odd just to restrict it to two, because you'd be saying, well, you want them to be the eyes and the ears for so many more. But you know, what we know is these are areas that we have feedback, we hear complaints when we're working with clients, when we're talking with inspecting officers. These are the ones that are often brought up. These are the things that are brought to their attention. So what we've done is focused, you know, and this may be for the time being, and you know, certainly everything's under review, isn't it, as it progresses. But these are the two that we feel the public care about. It's something that they can see easily. You know, is the member of the public able to say, well, was their cost assessment suitable and sufficient? And I think they failed to identify that it was harmful to ozone. Probably not. What we want them to do is, we know these are important. We know that they can judge them. So that's what we're certainly starting with, and we'll continue to review that as, you know, as the scheme evolves and as feedback is gathered.
It's interesting you say that, Rob, because it's quite difficult as a safety practitioner to almost kind of reverse engineer your own thought process. So I was suggesting early on going down the routes of common workplace hazards that result in time off work. So slips, trips, falls, manual handling, chemical safety. But it was actually one of the marketing team at Shield said, you know, I wouldn't have a clue what I'm looking for in relation to chemical safety if I'm a customer in a restaurant. What makes it unsafe? And it's interesting to have that kind of lay touch on a subject area, to cast this wide net, to say, here's some open text, you give us your feedback and we'll evaluate it. But really boiling it down to that fundamentals of, can people get out safely if there's a fire, and does the furniture look in good condition and repair, etc. Kind of does capture most of what we need, I guess.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Okay, so clearly the scheme is all in relation to legal compliance, and not to get too technical here, but certainly in the world of health and safety, businesses are as much concerned, if not more so, about civil claims defensibility. And that's not what the scheme is designed around. It's designed around making sure a business is safe and compliant against criminal law, making sure that legislation is followed, a reduced enforcement activity, and fewer workplace accidents. But we know civil claims are a big deal within hospitality and catering. So what do we mean by civil claims defensibility, Rob? How does safe to trade apply to this?
Yeah, I think, well, if we look at that civil claims defensibility, the burden of proof changes. We're going on that balance of probabilities. So straight away, the ability for someone to take a civil claim, the burden is reduced from what is a criminal. So that is why we see a number of claims out there. And we could get into a long discussion about, you know, how easy is it to make those claims, etc. But I think if you look at safe to trade, it does a couple of things. The first thing is, it's about safer every day. It's about reducing risk. So the first thing is, let's forget about claims defensibility. Let's stop the accidents in the first place. And again, remember, this is so important. What this is about doing is recognizing good businesses with robust systems that are making, you know, are safer every day. So the first thing is, let's stop the accidents in the first place. That's what we all want as practitioners. That's what we want. You know, I think everyone would agree to that. That's an honourable and right thing to do, is to reduce accidents. So that's the first thing the scheme does. And then the second thing is around that claims defensibility. Is can a business demonstrate that they've identified the correct hazards, they've put in suitable and sufficient controls, and then also introduced a scheme of monitoring or a system to monitor compliance against that. And of course, the great thing that Safe to Trade does, it will say, here is that standard. Have you applied the standard? Have you met the legal requirements? Have you demonstrated best practice? How fantastic is that? Is a business could say, not only have I met the legal requirements, I can demonstrate best practice. And maybe, just maybe, where you're saying where businesses are closing down those best practice actions, that will all help towards that claims defensibility. So what do we want to do? We want to reduce the likelihood of incidents occurring, reduce the severity of them, but also this scheme allows businesses to say, I can demonstrate legal compliance, I can demonstrate best practice, and actually, and here's the documentation, here's the reporting, and on top of that, I've had it independently verified by Safe to Trade. So we know claims defensibility can be a motivator for businesses, but hey, if that brings board focus, if that brings operator focus, if that brings the investment where it's required, then we will take that, and we will help make these workplaces safer for visitors, guests, employees.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about the regulator, and for traditional audience, the regulator is the local authority, environmental health. But when it comes to civil claims, one could almost count an insurance company as a regulator, because the businesses that require certain control measures put in place. You're absolutely right, Rob, that going the extra mile of complying with your best practices as well as your requirements is likely to satisfy that kind of hidden regulator, shall we call them. So yeah, it's a knock-on effect of, if you look after the legal aspects from the criminal law side, hopefully your civil claims should be managed also. Yeah,
absolutely.
We also know, Kevin, we also know that when a business derives benefit from assured advice through a coordinated partnership, such as this with Safe to Trade, that insurance premiums can come down. It's very well thought of. It does help with the mitigation, and so that is good for business.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've seen so much evidence of that on our helpline service over the years when we've been investigating accidents in partnership with our customers. Lovely. Right, guys, I am conscious of time. So let's move over to some questions from people who have been very patiently waiting. So I think it's only right and proper that let's start off with Pelminder's question here. So is there anything within the standard about car park management, including emergency electric vehicles, emergency procedures? So I know while you're kind of fingering through the document there, Claire, I'm guessing this would be incorporated into the workplace transport area.
Well, I was just looking at that workplace transport, and it's not prescriptive in there in terms of requirements, although it is it's really the way it's laid out is about there being shall be arrangements in place to ensure a person required to operate vehicles in the workplace hold the appropriate license and permits for the vehicle in use. Transport activities should be risk assessed and control measures indicated by the assessment applied, traffic routes, etc. Loading and unloading. Safety provisions shall apply to both traffic routes and vehicle parking areas. The arrangement shall be compliant to the requirement clauses. So there it isn't specific in terms of, it doesn't actually say it in terms of EV, but it is generalistic to what is there and the requirements there for the situation, for the scope on site. So when an auditor goes, they would look at that, they would look at what's happening and look at the needs and what's happening there, and it would form part of the standard in that way without it being so prescriptive.
Yeah, wonderful. And
it's how I think would happen anyway.
As well, that because the standard is so laid out as a hazard, you look at a work activity that might incorporate multiple hazards. So if you're walking around a car park to assess is it safe, you would be looking at vehicle directions, safety signage, slip strips and falls, potholes, parking areas, electrical vehicles, sighting from a fire safety perspective, making sure it's not too close to the building. So it's kind of, it's across the standard, isn't it? Kind of in many hazards rather than by work practice. Otherwise it would be like a phone book, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about the quality of the auditing team, isn't it? In looking at the standard and looking at what can be included within that, within the risk assessment of the site.
Yeah. Right. Wonderful. Thank you for your question, Pominda. Let's move on to another. Claire, people are very much calling on you to be the administrator here to read.
I know. I feel like, what is it, Susie? I feel a little bit like Susie Dent in the thingy corner at the moment.
Thank you. I did. Anna Carlton asked, is there anything in relation to pressure systems? So thinking of
yes, there is. Absolutely. So yes, H15. Yes, absolutely. So there is a section on that in terms of a written scheme of examination shall be in place. Qualifying pressure system shall be fixed or mobile as a system that contains steam, gas, or pressured liquid at a pressure above 0.5. The period examination shall be completed by the competent person before the equipment is placed into use, and at the frequency specified in the certificate, the system shall be maintained in a safe condition. And then it's about keeping the documentation from for 12 months. So yes, it is in there. Absolutely. I was thumbing through.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Hannah. I knew you were getting cocky when you started quoting the clause reference numbers. So let's move on to another question now.
Rob was speaking earlier. I was looking at the questions thinking, oh, I'll put that down.
Thanks, Claire. We have a question here from Jake Harrison. Hi, Jake. Nice to see you. With the introduction of the health and safety clauses into the Safe to Trade audit, what impact has this had on the duration of the audit? So I may as well take this myself, if that's okay with you guys. For customers who are already adopters of Safe to Trade, who are currently on the Safe to Trade register under the food safety and food standards standard, then they are currently, if they are a combined customer of Shield, having their Safe to Trade audit and a second health and safety audit. And for most customers, that has been either a 2-hour food Safe to Trade plus a 2-hour health and safety to take it up to a half-day traditional intervention, or more hotels or leisure parks would be days, full days or multiples thereof. So to answer your question, Jake, it would be just whatever the health and safety audit is, kind of coupled into a standard one. But as standard, bars, restaurants tend to be half a day. Hotels with full service would be a full day, and if they've got leisure facilities or etc., that would just be a bolt-on where it sits outside the standard currently. So I hope that answers your questions. And just as a follow-on, you ask a second question, Jake. When will we get a copy of the new health and safety clauses? So also those people who are currently food safety approved Safe to Trade, there will be a transition process where we bring you on board to combined certification. So you will almost be, dare I say, re-implemented with information those. But for current customers, your current account manager or safety consultant can furnish you with those. So just pop them a message, or Jake, if you want to pop me a message offline, I can get you anything you need if I can help at all there. Okay, let's see what else we have. We have a question from Anthony Miller. Thank you for your question, Anthony. We hire out our kitchen to outside catering companies for specific catering, Asian, halal. Are there any new clauses for these caterers? So kind of third-party caterers, how would that fit into Safe to Trade? Who wants to take this one? Is this one for you, Rob?
I'm not sure it is, because I'm going to say for Claire to go to the standard. What I would say is, of course, there's elements that, but you'd be looking at the almost the task is irrelevant. What you have is you have people using your premises,
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that they have adequate controls in place, provision of information. So it's about how do you manage those people visiting your premises. But I'm sure Claire is within the standard there.
But also, if we may use a very specific simile for what we have with the health, with the food safety existing standard, we have a number of approved locations on Safe to Trade who are concessions, maybe within a supermarket or a business, and they would be an independently registered food business operator with the council, who are inspected with their own food hygiene rating, and ultimately have their own Safe to Trade approval as a kiosk within. So
Kelvin, I think you've it's a really exciting development of the scheme, isn't it? Is when you're saying, so if you are at that hotel who is welcoming in it might be a pop-up, we're doing some work with the client at the moment on this, that a pop-up comes in, or actually they're doing a residency and they're using part of your premises for an extended period of time. Traditionally, what do we ask for? We talk about food hygiene rating, provide us with your PAT certification. And we know that there's problems, particularly with the food hygiene rating scheme. I've just experienced it just this week. Wouldn't it be great if we get to a position where a Safe to Trade business is saying, well, actually a precursor or a requirement, part of my procurement is, if you wish to come and do a pop-up, if you wish to do a residency, actually, I want you to be Safe to Trade. I want you to have been assessed by Safe to Trade, either within your business or where they're trading elsewhere. And that just becomes part of the requirement. And one of the things, it's a very long-winded process to approve these businesses in. But actually, wouldn't it be great if businesses started going Safe to Trade? That's what we ask for. And then if you're a Safe to Trade business, you know the standard, you know the requirements they've met. You're able to go on and look them up to see if there's any consumer feedback. So actually, and I don't think this is where we were going with this question, but wouldn't it be great if we get that to position that it becomes a procurement standard?
Absolutely. I'm very excited to talk current circumstances with this new question, a follow-up from Anna. Thanks again, Hannah. And Anna's interested in what the current level of compliance that we're seeing with health and safety clauses. And this is very hot off the press, isn't it, Claire? Because we were only in a meeting yesterday afternoon where we evaluate common top 10 non-conformances, how they fit within the standard and the scheme itself. And we've already seen that after a very short time of launching this health and safety standard, only in the last month or so, that chemical safety has already made its way into the top 10 non-conformances. So, to answer your question there, Anna, chemical safety within hospitality is one of the major hazard areas that we are finding at the moment.
And of course, Kelvin, the benefit of Safe to Trade is this unified question set. So, Anna, again, maybe unwittingly or maybe on purpose, we've moved into an area where this provides so much information. We're doing it with food safety already. That ability to look across sector, maybe regionally, whatever, and say, well, what are the hot topics? Why are we finding issues? And the great thing is that will allow businesses to benchmark themselves against others, but also it helps Safe to Trade to be able to support businesses by saying, actually, what we're seeing is these are the 3 biggest things or the 5 biggest things. Collectively, should something be done? Can guidance be published? Can we do some work around this to support businesses? So I'm not sure if that was the intention of your question, but it does lead on to this interesting area of unified audit sets that allow, and again, Claire and Kelvin, we've got excited around this big data, isn't it? That we're able to take this big data from all of these sources and really start looking for trends and how people can be supported.
This is probably one for you, Claire. Question from Stuart Horton. Thank you, Stuart. Is there a different setup between Scotland and England?
So although we're in England and we can only issue assured advice for obviously certain parts of the nation, and but it does take into account Scottish law as well in terms of food safety, and there's no change with health and safety anyway. So it's already included. So you don't have to worry about that. So if there's one single audit set, it just takes into account where where the hotel is, and what the requirement would be there. So it's the same, it would be the same standard.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. I think I don't know if it was me or whether there was a little bit of a breakdown in connection there, but just to paraphrase, the legislative mapping exercise that we did, it covers all of the devolved nations in the UK, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland. So it's relevant to all, and the auditors would interpret the standard relative to the country that they're working in. So I hope that helps there.
Yes.
Okay, we are coming up to the end, so I think there's time for one last question, and I've saved it to the end because, no pun intended, it is designed to whet your appetite a little bit. And Jake, it's a terrible pun. It's very early in the morning, I'm sorry. But Jake is interested in knowing, will we be integrating safe to trade and the health and safety clauses into swimming pools? So currently, leisure safety as a industry is outside of the scope of health and safety. The clause is designed for catering and hospitality. However, it is one of our next target areas within the next, well, imminently really. We've already started working on it. So we are looking to implement a standard for wet leisure. So that is coming very soon, and obviously we will be reaching out to a number of interested stakeholder engagement forums and our technical standards committee across all of the industry to make sure it is fit for purpose, and we look forward to launching it to you very, very soon. I certainly can't wait for this update because it will really help a number of customers at Shield. Great. Okay, so I guess really a number of thank yous are in order. Certainly thank you to all of our online guests today who have been asking their questions. I think we've had some tremendous engagement there. So thank you for taking the time not only to attend, but to engage with us with your questions. And also thank you to Rob and to Claire for your time at quite short notice, I may add as well, if I may not led too much behind the curtain there. So thank you for joining us on this session today.
No problem. It's nice to see you all.
Lovely. So that's all that we've got time for today. Thank you to everyone who has joined. If you did have a question, we didn't get to it, or you think of one afterward, please just drop something in the comments in the notes section, and our marketing team will follow up on that and get some answers to you. But that's all for today. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us next month for another Safe to Trade session. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Go safely. Take care.